He's the best.
Oh,
He is
yeah.
just,
He's
he is just
delightful.
totally the best. Okay, so I'm going to say, and we're going to act like we just starting the show and we say, hey, Nancy, so nice to be here. And then we'll just get into it.
Okay.
Adam, you're still sort of there. There, now he's not. Okay. Are you okay? Are you comfortable with everything?
Yes, I am, sure.
Okay, great. You know, your eyes are so sparkly even on this. Like, you look so pretty even on this thing. You
I'm
do.
just so glad to see you. We need to be
I
Zoom calling more,
I know we need
FaceTiming, whatever.
we
Yeah,
need to be in person more is what we need.
yeah,
But
I
anyway, we'll
know.
get
That's
there.
really what we need.
Okay, so here we go. Hey, Nancy, thanks so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you for having me, Tricia. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, you're a perfect guest for this season 2 when we talk about the traits that go behind being an artist. That's what's required to be a creative, those traits that keep us going and going through difficult things and building stamina and keeping the endurance going. So I want to tell our listeners that you opened your bookstore in Terabang about 6 years ago, and you've already been named one of the top 5 bookstores of the year by Publishers Weekly. We're going to find out soon whether or not you've been named number 1. Is that correct? Right?
Yes, but we think of ourselves as winners already. I mean, we're so delighted, but of course, we'd love to be the winner, but we were just so delighted to be one of 5 finalists.
Absolutely. But I want you to tell me when you decided to open a bookstore and why.
Do you know, I had always loved books and had grown up in a family where my mother really, loved books, read to us, took us to the local library. I just always loved books and stories, and I always loved bookstores. And then I was an English major in college and just was always drawn to literature and stories and the written word and really beautifully written words. And so I always loved bookstores everywhere I'd go. And then one by one, of course, they all started to close because it's a tricky business. You have to be pretty determined and pretty creative and nimble to make it work. There aren't huge margins in books, so it really has to be, out of passion that you do it. And so there was an opportunity I had. I'd carried this little dream around for a long time, like maybe 20 years, and I'd inquired enough about it, or maybe looked at spaces here and there, but somehow the word was out. Anyway, a fellow who moved to town who had been managing a bookstore and was looking for a partner. And so it was like, okay, be careful what you wish for, because when you get it, what do you do? And so, but I had but it was just perfect. So we started the store together in 2017.
So you basically carried this dream around for 20 years, 25 years?
I really did. And who knows why a dream is implanted in you, really, but it was really there. And so it is kind of remarkable that little dream really came true. So I think one of my messages to people would be pay attention to that, whatever it is, because it's deeply fulfilling to make a dream, big or small, really come true. And
Well,
yeah.
no, and one of the things though I want to ask you, so you decided to open an independent bookstore in 2017. So you may have been carrying this dream around for 20 or 25 years. And that it started before there was Amazon, before all the bookstores were closing, before there were ebooks, before there was, and yet you still went ahead and opened this bookstore.
Right.
It feels a little bit like a David and Goliath story. So did you have any naysayers? Like when you said, I'm going to do this?
Sure. Yeah, there were a lot of naysayers. And I think the thing that really motivated me, I mean, it's not, you don't go into this business thinking that you might make a whole lot of money. It's not, you don't go into it for a big profit. You go into it because it's a business you love and you feel like it makes a real difference to a community. And I to this day, 6 years later, I really not only believe that, I believe it more because I've seen how it happens. And it's so touching to me how many people just come up to me and thank me, people who I don't even know, and just say, thank you for having this bookstore here. No, it's not for everyone, but for people who love bookstores, there's nothing like an independent bookstore. I think they're so personal. The curation of the books is very special. It's very different. It's like a boutique versus a department store. I would say Barnes and Noble is like a department store, and you go into a boutique and it's like, oh, everything's here because it's been thoughtfully chosen. It's not,
Yeah.
it's not an algorithm or whatever that decided these are going to be the best sellers and this is what we're going to spread across the country. And so, and that, it's like any local business. They tend to have a lot more personality and the relationships. There's a lot of personal relationships that develop between our booksellers and our customers.
So, but when people were saying, don't do it, what were some of the reasons why they were telling you not to do it? And what would you say back to them when they would say, don't do it? Because
Do you know?
there are a lot of artists out there. There are a lot of
Yeah.
creators out there. There are a lot of entrepreneurs out there who go in with this big idea, and they have to be careful because all these wet blankets will come along and try to squelch
Yeah.
it. So how did you say no to the wet blankets?
I don't know. I guess it was just something that I was so strongly compelled to do. It just didn't discourage me from doing it. And I have to tell you, I've never ever regretted a day of it. I mean, I'm just so grateful that this opportunity came together. It felt very serendipitous. It felt, like, oh my gosh, that suddenly everything came together that allowed me to really make this happen. And so I think you just have to stay tuned to the forces out there in the universe that are nudging you forward. And then I just felt nudged forward by it. And there was certainly enough encouragement and enough people who did encourage me and
Yeah.
were so grateful that, we had some really good experienced booksellers too. I mean, it really is like a whole profession of its own. You have people who have been in the book industry all their careers. That's really all they want to do. And they're real specialists. And it's a very multi-layered industry. And there are a lot of tricky relationships between, not tricky, like difficult, but just to be knowledgeable about how to connect with publishers and get the right inventory in and all of that. You need people who are experienced in the field to pull it all off. And we managed to attract really wonderful career booksellers where we are. And I think our customers appreciate that.
Yeah. Okay. So you've got all these things that came together so you could create this fabulous bookstore. You're open for 2 years. You're doing well. Were you doing pretty well for two years in?
Yeah.
Doing well. And then, so what happened in October of 2019?
Well, it's in October of 2019. It was a Sunday night at about 6:30. Tornadoes came ripping through Dallas, and out here in Texas and Oklahoma, there are tornadoes that always are kind of around. That's not a novelty, but usually they're far away in the country. This one came roaring right through the heart of the city of Dallas, and the bookstore, the shopping center where the bookstore was, just took a direct hit. It was right in the path of the tornado, and it just obliterated everything there. It was 2 years before they even could open that center again, but it was declared a FEMA emergency disaster zone. We could not ever step foot back in there. It was so dangerous. The walls came in, the roof came down, and then the sprinklers came on. So if there was any hope of salvaging any books at all, the sprinklers came on. And I don't mean to laugh, but the whole thing at the time, of course, is not funny, but it's just so outrageously. Who would have ever thought of all the things when you're opening a bookstore that you might be the direct hit of a tornado? But of course it did. And there was nothing was salvageable. And it was just,
like not
one
book, like not one anything.
Not one. And like the Gap on the corner, there were clothes and shirts found in people's yards for miles away. I don't think anyone ever said they found a book. Maybe they were too heavy, but it was just, yeah. And so we just had to, I remember getting a phone call, and it was just like, it was really surreal. And I think when you're talking about resilience, I think, when I was just so grateful that nobody was hurt. We had just closed on that Sunday night, and nobody was hurt. And in the entire city, nobody was hurt, which was kind of miraculous.
Yeah.
And people were in their homes, and it just wasn't, I think, with that fact that it was a Sunday night, a Dallas Cowboy game was going on. And so I think people were off the streets, which sounds kind of crazy, but it was sort of miraculous. Not one person in the wake of this devastating tornado where houses were destroyed and neighborhoods were destroyed. Nobody in the city was killed. And
Wow.
there were some minor injuries, but nobody was killed. So you really it's all perspective, I think. Sometimes I think keeping going is keeping the right perspective. You thought, all right, this was not my home. This was not nobody I care about, was hurt. Okay, this we've just got to pick up and move on. And so is that too long of an answer?
No, no. And I love though, first of all, there's a couple of headlines that I loved where I was trying to find the article. I couldn't find it in my research, but I can remember it saying that the tornado came through Dallas, but it met the force of nature in the form of Nancy Perot
Oh
because because, because a month later
oh,
you had opened. You had opened, right?
we did. And it never dawned on me not to open it again, which is funny. I wasn't, it just didn't even dawn on me. It's like, well, we've got to go find a new space. And I think some of that, of course, had to do with the employees that were dependent upon me. It wasn't just, me that this was affecting. It was, we had 13 or 14 employees that really depended on this for their livelihood. So it never dawned on me not to reopen. And it was also very touching. The community of book lovers in Dallas, it's like, should we start a GoFundMe and all this sort of this upswell of support was so touching. And there was just people really that really was great wind, underneath our wings for
Yeah.
sure
Yeah.
to see how much that was what was touching, as how in such a short time how valued this store really was by the
Yeah.
book lovers of our
Yeah.
community. So,
There's a wonderful quote, though, about you in the paper that said they described you as confident and resilient and like a quarterback that doesn't get flustered. I
oh God.
loved that. But when you think about those of us who are, creators of, your medium happens to be a bookstore. Others mediums are, whatever we're doing, whether it's a performance piece, whether it's a theater piece, whether it's an art show, whatever we're doing, you have these moments when it's like, okay, that didn't go as planned at all. And how do I pivot and what do I do? And you have that decision of, well, do I just close it down or do I keep on going? And
Yeah.
so, and that's kind of that moment where you kind of find out what you're made of, sort of, or how committed you are to that project. Am
Yeah.
I so committed that I'm going to overcome that? Which brings me to, so you're up and running a month to the day after the tornado hit. So that's November of 2019. And then we all know what happened in March of 2020. So then you get COVID.
Oh my gosh.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
so how did you navigate COVID then?
Well, and the thing about when we moved into this new space too, I think we went to IKEA and we, found secondhand bookshelves. I mean, the store did not look great, but we just pulled it all together. And so we'd been busy reordering all of that stuff. And then COVID hits. And that was just the strangest time for all of us, wasn't it? I mean, but how to navigate that once it really started, because you had to, on one hand, your creativity, we had to be really creative about, you wanted to keep people's jobs steady, of course, because that was the most important thing, is how it would impact our employees. But also you had to protect them at this very unknown stage of that, pandemic. Nobody knew how it was transmitted. So we went to curbside service. We also really pivoted to online ordering and really pushing for that. And there were a lot of people, naysayers, who said, oh, you'll never be able to get the online ordering. Don't even try at an independent bookstore because everyone's so accustomed to Amazon. Well, That's not true. I think I would say to people, don't be afraid to challenge what is considered conventional wisdom. I mean, that just wasn't true. Our customers really, really wanted to support us, and so we did a big campaign for online ordering and curbside delivery and all that. And so we limped along. I mean, it wasn't easy because a big part of our business is author visits, and we had over 250 author visits last year, as a matter of fact, and. And that completely shut down. So it wasn't a great time, but we were able to get through it. Thanks in huge part to our to our community and our loyal booksellers, who I think really did appreciate our commitment to them too. That we stayed steady.
Is that when you created your van? Is that when the Interabang van came on the horizon?
I don't think it was directly because of COVID, but it was somewhere in there. Yeah. Our mobile billboard. Yeah.
And what does tell listeners what, because this is I just love this ability. Again, I don't, in episode 4 of season 1, creative coach Mark McGinnis was my guest, and he was talking about how there are so many different ways to be creative in so many different mediums.
Yes.
And that's why I keep saying the bookstore right now for you is your medium.
Yeah.
That's what you're doing. And so one way to keep the story going was to have this van that goes out there. And so tell a little bit about what the van does.
Well, the van really just delivers books to our offsite events, and picks up orders, and I mean mostly, and so we really just use it when we're going to offsite events, which is pretty regularly. Though we actually probably have at least 3 or 4 a week offsite, as well as those that are in the store. So someone said that the book business is kind of an event business, really. I mean, we have so many events all the time. So it really is for deliveries. But sometimes I said, let's just get out. Everybody just take a turn getting in there, going to pick up your lunch in it. Let's just keep driving around the neighborhood so people know we're alive and well. And anyway, always trying to find new customers. So yes, while people might not think of the bookstore business as like creative, like being an artist, you have to be really creative to keep the business kind of viable, to keep it when you are kind of an underdog in this online world, and you have to be endlessly thinking about what do people want, what will appeal to them, what brings our customers in. And so there's a lot of, and maybe not conventional creativity, but a lot of creativity of thought, kind of ingenuity. How do we bring new people in, and how do we try to make this work? And it does take a lot of creativity and thought to be nimble, and to always be thinking of new ways to draw new customers in.
Well, that's exactly what artists do. We're unbelievably resourceful people. And so that's what you're having to be through all these things is okay, how can I best use the resources I have? How can I turn this into something else? And I mean, it's just that constant idea of how do I expand my resources when I don't have a lot of resources? How can I create something?
And how do you push past limits? Yeah.
Absolutely. How do you push past the limits?
Roadblocks. Yeah.
And that conventional thinking that says, don't try, no one will ever go online.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes, exactly. Because that proved not to be at all true.
Yeah. So that is, I mean, I have this No Time to Be Timid manifesto, and a lot of that is like constraints or opportunities, right? So how do you take this constraint and switch it around and make it work for you, right? So
yeah.
Okay, so you make your way through COVID, not all the way, but it's March of 2020 is COVID, and then February of 2021, what happens then?
Oh my gosh, at the Snowmageddon, everyone calls it in Dallas, when the freeze, that crazy freeze, and that whole electrical grid shut down, and Dallas was without electricity for a full week, and it was very cold. And so somebody called and said, one of our customers texted and said, or emailed and said, I think there's water in the bookstore. And I was like, oh no, because you don't really want water on the floor of the bookstore. And I I went over there, on the hazardous icy roads, and I walked in, and there were about 4 inches of water covering the entire bookstore. And the shop next door, their pipes had broken, because pipes broke all over town when the sudden, hard freeze that lasted for so long. So the little shop next door flooded the bookstore, and there was no electricity, so we couldn't even get a shop vac to get the water out of the bookstore. It was it was really one of those things. And then amazingly, the books weren't damaged. We were worried about the humidity. The books weren't damaged, but our brand new bookshelves that had finally arrived, all of our fixtures that lined the walls and we'd waited months for, they're made of particle board, too much information, but they absorbed all of that water like a sponge, and they were all destroyed. So our brand new, at this point, our insurance company fired us. I know. They decided after a tornado and a flood, we can't. I mean, who would have thought that a bookstore was a high risk, insurer? But but anyway, and so once again, we had to get all new fixtures. But but again, it's all about perspective. It's like, okay, it's not my home. Nobody was hurt. Our fish tank didn't fare so well without the electricity. But poor little fish, I'm afraid. But we just, again, you just kind of have to put your head down and just kind of push through it. And again,
well, I'm going to challenge you there, because not
Yeah.
everyone would put their head down and just push through it. They just wouldn't.
No.
And so, was there ever a point, though? I mean, I can see why you make it through the tornado. The rest of the world had to go through, the pandemic. But when the store flooded, was there a moment of you going, okay, did you ever have a moment of like, I'm just calling it a day here? Was
Well,
there
I
ever a moment that you wanted to quit?
Well, one funny writer said, "I think all of the horses of the apocalypse have visited you all," and I thought that was really funny. And I did at one point to think, "Okay, God, am I not supposed to have this bookstore? Are you trying to send me some kind of some signs from the heavens?" But so far, ever since that, things have been pretty smooth. And it's the first normal year we really had was last year. And so, no, I think it did seem strange that these three sort of catastrophic things had happened within such a short time of each other. But again, it goes back to perspective. And also, my parents were both really resilient people. And I think when you just feel like you're doing the right thing and it's serving people well, and especially when you have people dependent upon you, employees, I think you just kind of know what you need to do. And if a friend said, and I thought it was a great line, when you're in your lane, there is no traffic. And I thought, oh, that's a really interesting line, because I do feel that way somehow with the bookstore. Although we have had some strange hurdles thrown at us, that we were always able to figure out a path forward. And I guess just giving up was just never an option to me. Now, I don't want to tempt fate and say, let's hope nothing else happens for a while. It's like, oh my God, if ever. But, or nothing catastrophic on that level. I mean, of course, every day there are little issues, big and small, but, and those are sometimes, no, they're not harder, but this was just such a clear path forward. You either called it quits or you figured out how to move forward. And like I said, I think my parents are both very resilient people and was set a good example for us. So I guess that's a big part of it. But I think for a really creative person, just to tap into those inner resources and don't give up on what you really love. Because although I have done other things in life that were probably someone would say were maybe more important or whatever, or not, this is the most joyful thing I've ever done and the most deeply satisfying. And you wouldn't say it has the biggest impact on the world, but it does have an impact. And like I said, it has brought me more joy than not. I mean, raising my children brought me the most joy, but this has just brought me a deep, deep sense of purpose and joy. And I'm so grateful for it. And so that would be my encouragement to anyone who is being discouraged about a creative pursuit is the joy that it will bring you is so worth the journey.
Well, and it's beautifully said. And also, you just don't know the lives that you're going to touch.
Yeah.
I mean, and one of the things that you do, you have an incredible outreach. It's not just selling the books.
Right.
It's not just selling books. I mean, you have a mission and a margin. I mean, you have created a sustainable business. This is not a vanity project. This is a sustainable business that's working. And the outreach is a very important part of what you do. Talk a little bit about some of the outreach that you do, because I think it's also important for, as creators and artists, to see the ways that we can give back, how we can make a difference, how we can, even as we, pursue what we're trying to do, whatever it might be in the studio, what we can also give to others, how it comes back around and serves us when we're serving other people, how it comes back and serves us.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I do think for the store, there is a huge community service aspect of it. And we do it a lot. Of course, we have all of our author events and things which are free, and I think those all really enrich the community greatly. And the best, it brings these authors to Dallas, and so it's enriched the whole literary scene in Dallas. Dallas is now, and that's an important role that independent bookstores play. Is this? The publishers send the authors out on tour, and they stop really at independent stores, and they love the independent bookstores because we're the ones who are really selling their books. We're talking them up, we're recommending them to their readers. We're, a lot of hand selling going on to people who come in, but also through our newsletter and all that, we have a really wide reach, and so we can have a big impact on the success of an author. And but also we do a lot with our local schools. Twice a year, we do a book drive for a wonderful organization called United to Learn that goes into the public schools in Dallas and the more underserved communities, and really, fills their libraries and enrich, supports not only the physical plant, but all of the faculty needs and things like that. So twice a year, we do a big United to Learn book drive. We try to partner with a lot of the literacy organizations in town. There's Readers to Leaders, there's Catch Up and Read. We're always looking for creative ways to partner with them. We have in-store events where they, get 10% of the proceeds, kind of things, where or we. Anyway, so we do a lot with the literacy groups. We also do school book fairs, and it makes more sense these days. In our day, the book fair would come to the school. That's very difficult to do with the way the book business is structured these days. So now we do in-store book fairs where the families come, and the faculty, and a percentage of the sales that night go back to fund the school's library. And of course,
okay.
Yeah. So we do a lot of different things like that. We also have, book clubs that are really well attended. Our adult book buyer and is Lori Feathers. She has this really, really big following. Once a month, she has her book club, and I think she gets between 40 and 50 people there every month, and they are very devoted. And we've just started a second in-store book club. It's the British Film Institute Classics, and and so Lewis, who's a newer employee, it was his idea to start this book club where you read the British Film Institute and this book length, a book about a classic film, and then he leads a discussion on that. And we just started that, and it was really well attended. And then Lori also does what she's called, and tell me if I'm going on too long.
No, it's okay. Also, we can edit all sorts of things,
okay.
But keep going.
A collective read where she will tackle a terrific classic that might be a little bit intimidating, like Anna Karenina or the Brothers Karamazov, or in the spring, we're going to be doing Middlemarch, and everyone, and it's nationwide. It's even, I think it's even worldwide. She had some followers from England. You read 15 pages a day, and then on a Slack channel, they have a discussion, not channel, but what would Slack be? On Slack,
Yeah, it's a Slack channel. Yeah, it's a
yes,
Slack channel.
they have a discussion about the book, and that she had, I think, over 150 followers for that. And so that seems to be very popular. So, like I said, we try to do our part philanthropically for the community. We always, if we're ever asked to, can the Boy Scouts do their thing here? It was like, of course, so we really want to be a great community partner. And then I think we do a lot to try to enrich the community and work with the other, literary organizations in town. We're always looking for those opportunities.
Yeah. Yeah. So how would you, I mean, it's pretty remarkable. I was reading about is it the collective? What is it?
The collective read.
The collective read. I'm like, I need to get on top of that because there's some books that I really want to read, but I'm like, oh, how do I break into those? How do I get into those books? And it would be nice to be sort of had my hand held getting in there, because I think as an artist, I mean, the importance of reading, no matter what our medium is really, really critical, to really just, because travel's so important to an artist. We can't always travel, so we might as well travel through a book. That'll get us where we want to go, Tell me a little bit, though. I want to ask you this question. I know that you say that your parents were very resilient. Some of us were just born with being resilient, but how would one cultivate resilience? How does one, what are the tools to help you become even more resilient?
Well, I think perspective, to try to, when you're in the moment, to kind of back up and think how, just to keep it in perspective. Like I said, I think for me to realize, all right, this could have been worse. People could have been really hurt, like with the tornado. We could have lost employees. We could have, it could have been a really devastating thing. And so it's like, this is manageable. And I think too, if you're trying to cultivate resilience, you remind yourself of times where you did bounce back from a setback, and you bounced back or you pushed through, or you didn't, it does make you stronger. I do believe that if you navigate through something without giving up, you learn so much, and then you're stronger the next time for it. It's kind of just that whole, I think, just coming into touch with your inner resources and realizing that they're vast. I mean, sometimes, it's part of when we all grow up, we realize, I guess, that we're, capable of so much more than we might have thought that we were. So I think it's never underestimating yourself and finding inspiration in, if it's your faith, if it's your friendships, to not be afraid to draw on whatever resources of support. I think to identify those resources that fill you back up, or that you can lean on in time of need. I mean, my friendships have done so much for me. I was like, Tricia, you've done so much for me when I've had setbacks, and we've all had plenty of them.
Yeah.
And I think, but it is a defining moment as how you let your setbacks define you. And so I think that it can either make your life better and you can push on stronger, or you can really, you just don't want to, I mean, some things are just so devastating. Of course, it would take anyone, a while to ever bounce back. But I just think to try to figure out a way to not to ignore it, but kind of learn all the lessons that whatever that particular experience has to offer, and then move forward.
That's wonderful advice. I mean, just to even look back and say, what have you gotten through before? Because, as artists, often, the rejection is just a part of our world. Setbacks are part of our world. And then you have life that happens at the same time. And this can be often, being an artist, a solitary pursuit. Amy Grant was on the show earlier this season, and she was saying, you want to have solitude and community. in the context of community.
Yeah,
So it's
right.
similar to what you're saying as well, to have that sort of net that can help us navigate when the stuff, when the book doesn't get picked up, and the whatever dream you had, you need to have a redirect or something happens. How do you personally, and it might be a similar answer, but how do you overcome discouragement? When you get discouraged, how do you navigate that?
Well, I think all of us have to identify where we get our reservoirs filled back up. If it's, and I think that's a big important thing to pause and really think about what fills you up when you are discouraged. And I think, of course, I'm very fortunate. I have a wonderful husband and wonderful friendships. I have 4 terrific sons, and so in a big family. So I'm lucky in that I have a very strong support system. But I think just solitude really fills me back up. Really being in nature. I'm sure for most creative people that makes a big difference. Or just, I think identifying those things that do fill your reservoirs back up is critical. And so, as I said, I think too, there's a faith element, a tremendous one, that I think can take many forms for different people, but that makes a tremendous difference to me to go to that faith that was, just placed in me at such a young age. And that really is a big part of my foundation. I think that keeps me steady when things are trying to throw you off kilter.
So let me ask you this question. Thank you for that, and I resonate with a lot of what you're saying. And I do have to let our listeners know that you have held my hand through some very some very tricky times as well. You are in that circle of friends that we're very blessed on that front. But so what's the, for those artists and those creatives, and you've talked about this a little bit, but I want you to say it again, that what's the reward of just moving ahead with your dream? I mean, literally you were told, why would you have this dream in the first place? And then you had it, and you had these 3 major catastrophic things, plus just the ins and outs of trying to run a business, which is hard to do. But what's that reward of moving ahead with your dream, even when other people are saying,
I think the reward is to just look around and realize that you're really adding pleasure, enjoyment, enlightenment to people's lives. And we have these story hours, and all the little children come in. I mean, it's a very joyful business. And the interesting thing is, it's not as though it's always my circle of friends. It's most of the time it's people I've never seen before. And that's really touching, because I think for any creative person to realize that their art has an impact on a community far beyond what they think they might have reached. And so that's very satisfying to look around and see this really worked, and that it is a sustainable business. And we did have to work very hard and to make it so, because you just have to work at it every day, trying to figure out how to keep this business viable and relevant in people's lives. And also just the value of reading, of course. And going back to what you were saying about creative people needing to read, I do think the imagery and just beautiful language is always inspiring. If it's poetry, if it's just beautifully written words, if it's adventure, I think that would fill any artists well a little bit or a lot. But so, does that answer your question? I think
it does. Yeah. And now I also know, I mean, yes, you have owned this bookstore. I also know that you were a freelance writer for about 17 years. Was that correct? About how many years were you freelance writing?
I maybe just about 12 or so. I think it wasn't quite that long, but I lose track. But I
but
did love doing that. That was
but
just
again, you also know you've been on the side of the person who's writing and who's
yes.
creating something. And so do you find any similarities between what it took for you to write, because I know you wrote a lot for Veranda magazine. Do you find any similarities in what you were, the stamina it took to continue writing for all of those years and the stamina it takes to keep the bookstore going?
Well, what I loved about all the writing I did for Veranda was that I was always given a topic and a deadline. And so I and I that discipline was imposed upon me from the outside that I had to get that in. I really admire an author who can sit down day after day and craft a book that maybe has a much more open-ended deadline that has and especially if they're just writing a first novel where maybe they don't have the backing of a publisher. And I think that requires just extraordinary discipline and commitment, and I really admire that. But I loved the creativity of what I did. I think words can be very creative, and because they paint pictures and they create images, and I loved having to craft, to be given a word count and to have to create this sort of work of art more and within a limited structure. It was just great. And I did it at a very busy time of my life, but it was like a whole other part of my brain that was getting to be put to work. And I just loved it. So I mean, I probably should be writing more now, but I need someone to give me a topic and a deadline. And then
Well,
I'm
we
better
can
at
give
that.
you we can give you a topic and a deadline, and then at the end of the season, we can touch base with you and say, "Hey,
Oh, goodness. Okay.
yeah, share the writing with us," because I think it would be really wonderful if one day one of your books was on Interabang's shelves to be
Mm.
sold.
Well, I appreciate that. And this is why we're such good friends, Tricia, because you're just such an encourager. But I think what you do, creating things just is, and keeping yourself on track with that is such tremendous discipline. And I really admire that so much. And, but like I said, creativity does take a lot of different forms.
It
And,
does. It does. It
yeah,
does.
but I do
Okay,
think you have to be determined, and that's a whole different kind of determination when you're putting those parameters upon yourself, I think, and one I
well,
admire very much.
and it is one of those things that we have to overcome, which is why I really wanted you to be on the show, because you've had these enormous things to overcome, and also you being very fearless as far as breaking, going against starting a business when it may not, other people may say, why are you starting this business right now? And you're also breaking convention in a lot of ways in how you're doing the bookstore. I mean, there's so much about community, there's so much about curating these special books. I mean, there was one, Ryan, I think it's Ryan Raffaelli at Harvard Business School, and he was saying independent bookstores such as Interabang are spearheading a renaissance because they break the mold on what's expected. And so I
Oh,
thought that was just so fantastic, because
yeah.
you are part of this renaissance and you are breaking a mold, and it's a very creative thing to do in a business that people may not think would be as successful as you've been able to make it. So
Well, you're so kind, and I do think that I do always love to put in a good strong plug for just supporting local businesses. I think in a smaller community that's very obvious, but in a bigger city, I just think people underestimate how much, not underestimate, they take for granted sometimes that they need to support, that if they want those stores to remain, they really need to support them. And because they just enrich a community so much, because they just have so much personality. They tend to reflect their local communities. One of my favorite parts of this business has been working with our local authors. We have fabulous local authors, and we've been able to do so much to really make their books a success. And so that's one of my favorite parts of all is, we have amazing cookbook authors. We have some Alex Snodgrass, who's a New York Times bestseller. We have Jerry Smith, who wrote a book about her great aunt, who was one of the major forces behind the founding of Neiman Marcus. She was Jerry Marcus Smith. And we have, Laura Wilson, the photographer, who's also the mother of Owen and Luke Wilson, and
Mm-hmm.
she has just come out with an amazing book about the authors, and she spent about 10 years interviewing authors from around the world, Pulitzer Prize winning authors, I mean authors of that level. And it's this gorgeous book of photography, and we had it was wonderful. We had events for her all over town, that selling her book, and of course it's sold all over the country. All these books are, but we've got these extraordinary local authors, and that's been great fun to impact the community in that way. And Barnes and Noble couldn't have done that. I think that's where local businesses respond to the needs of their communities in very particular ways.
Now, you also have, there's one more thing I want to ask you about, Nancy. Hold on, let me find it. Yeah. So you also give the Republic of Consciousness Prize that
Yes.
honors small presses,
Yes.
which I think is fantastic because,
Yes.
again, you're supporting these artists who are, these artistic presses that are trying to come up with a more risk-taking work, and you're offering them support.
Yes, and I tell you, all of the credit for that goes to Lori Feathers, who is our book buyer, who is also, on the National Book Critics Circle. She's very renowned in the book world, and it was her idea. She does a podcast called Across the Pond, where she has a colleague in London, and they review either an American book or a British author. I think about once a month. But it was Lori's idea. Lori is really a force in the book world, and it was her idea to start this Republic of Consciousness Prize, and that really is more her personal project, but it just aligns so well with everything that the bookstore is about. And we do feature these small presses because the important thing for people to know, I think, is that the voices of some really important authors would not be heard if it were not for these smaller presses. They're not going to be able to get the attention of like a Penguin Random House. And so these smaller presses allow really successful authors, authors who later become very, very successful, to get a start. And so that's why it's so important to keep the many layers of the publishing industry really rich and strong, because if it's too driven, they'll only be able to publish kind of the big blockbuster authors if people don't support the local bookstores, because when they order online from some of our big online providers, who I don't want to name names, the margin that goes back to the publishers is so, it just is. So then their business gets squeezed down, and they can't cover as many authors. And so it's just, it's a very, yes. So Lori supporting the small presses is critical in the bigger picture, supporting the local stores who, yes, it's hard to justify spending $1 more for a book, but that dollar makes such a difference to the flexibility of the publishing industry, or the breadth of the publishing industry. Am I describing that well?
Yeah, it's a complicated process, but
it is a complicated process.
The gist of it is, though, your dream from 20 or 25 years ago, which you saw through, is now enabling other people's dreams to come true.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful to say. And I think it is, and that's a great feeling.
Yeah, and it's really wonderful. Nancy, I'm so delighted that you took the time to be on the show. I really appreciate it. And everyone, we encourage you to go to, obviously, this is our sponsor, Interabang, and we encourage you to go to interabangbooks.com. And Nancy, thanks so much for being on the show.
Yes, and please order lots of books and support your local bookstores, because that just makes the whole industry flourish, and it's a great thing. Thank you, Tricia. I'm just honored to be here, and I've loved getting to talk about this today. It's so dear to my heart, so thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Nancy. Okay.
Bye.
Bye. Adam, are you there? Adam. Okay. The voice of God. Nancy, you were great.
Oh, was I too serious though? God, I'm too serious. That's why I need Tricia.
Wait, where'd you go?
Was that okay? I mean, was I? Wait.